Jamal Washington walked slowly across the sprawling campus of Mason University, his backpack heavy with textbooks. The autumn leaves crunched under his feet as he made his way to the Phillips Science Building, where his advanced theoretical physics class would begin in 15 minutes. This was only his third week at the prestigious university, and he still felt out of place among the sea of unfamiliar faces. Mason University was known for its competitive physics program. Getting accepted had been Jamal's dream since he was 13, when his uncle first showed him the wonders of quantum mechanics. His uncle, who worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, had recognized something special in Jamal, a natural ability to see patterns and solutions that others missed. As Jamal pushed open the heavy doors of the lecture hall, he noticed most seats in the front rows were already taken. He quietly made his way to the back row, sliding into a seat next to a blonde girl who was frantically reviewing her notes. "Did you understand the homework?" she whispered, looking up at him with worried eyes. "Yeah, it wasn't too bad," Jamal replied softly. In truth, he had completed the assignment in less than an hour. The problems Professor Allen had given them were challenging for most students, but for Jamal, they were like simple puzzles he had been solving since high school. The classroom fell silent as Professor Richard Allen strode through the door. He was a tall man with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. His reputation preceded him: brilliant, demanding, and notoriously difficult to impress. He had written 3 books on quantum field theory and had been nominated for the Nobel Prize twice. Students both feared and respected him. "Good morning," Professor Allen said, his voice carrying to the back of the room without effort. "I trust you all completed the assignment on quantum entanglement. Before we move forward, let's see if anyone actually understood the material." His eyes scanned the room like a predator looking for prey. Several students slouched in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Jamal remained upright, but kept his eyes on his notebook. He had learned from experience that standing out too much on the first day could make things difficult later. "Ms. Carter," Professor Allen called to a girl in the second row, "explain to the class how quantum entanglement challenges our understanding of locality." The girl stumbled through an answer, her voice shaking slightly. Professor Allen's expression remained unimpressed. "That's the textbook definition, Ms. Carter. I asked for understanding, not memorization." He turned to write a complex equation on the board, his chalk moving quickly and precisely. Jamal recognized it immediately: a modified Bell inequality that showed the mathematical proof of non-locality in quantum systems. But Professor Allen had added an extension to the problem that made it particularly challenging. "This, Professor Allen said, tapping the board, "is what separates those who will merely pass my class from those who might actually contribute something to the field one day." He turned back to face the students, his eyes moving past the front rows where the eager students sat, past the middle where the confident ones were placed, until they landed on the back row, directly on Jamal. Something in the professor's expression changed, a subtle hardening of his features, a slight narrowing of his eyes. "You there in the back." The young man in the blue shirt. Jamal felt his heart jump. "Yes, sir?" "Come solve this equation." The room fell completely silent. Jamal could feel the eyes of every student turning to look at him, some with pity, others with curiosity. This was Professor Allen's infamous ritual, singling out a student to prove a point. Usually the point was that they weren't as prepared as they thought they were. "Sir?" Jamal asked, wondering if he had heard correctly. "You heard me. Come solve this equation, unless you'd prefer to drop my class now and save us both the time." Jamal slowly gathered his notebook and pencil. As he walked down the aisle toward the board, he could hear whispers among the students. Most professors at Mason didn't call on students like this, especially not in the first few weeks. But Professor Allen wasn't most professors. "What's your name?" Professor Allen asked as Jamal approached the board. "Jamal Washington, sir." "Well, Mr. Washington, show us what you know about quantum entanglement." Jamal took a deep breath as he faced the board. The equation was complex, but familiar. Since he was 12, he had been solving problems like this with his uncle on weekends. By 15, he was reading graduate-level textbooks. By 17, he was corresponding with physicists online who didn't know they were discussing theoretical models with a high school student. He picked up the chalk, its weight comforting in his hand. The room was so quiet, he could hear the ticking of the large clock above the door. He began to work through the equation, his hand moving steadily across the board. Professor Allen watched with his arms crossed, his expression impossible to read. He had expected the young man to struggle, to perhaps make a beginning attempt before giving up. That was the usual pattern when he pulled this particular teaching tactic. But Jamal's chalk moved without hesitation. Jamal not only solved the basics equation, but continued to the extended problem Professor Allen had added. His mind worked through the variables with a clarity that came naturally to him. When he encountered the trick in the equation, a deliberate error Professor Allen had included to trip up students, he paused briefly, then corrected it before continuing. "There's an inconsistency here, Professor," Jamal said quietly, pointing to the part of the equation he had modified. "If we follow your original setup, we get a contradiction with the conservation laws." A few gasps came from the front row. No one corrected Professor Allen's work. Jamal finished the solution and added, an elegant proof that simplified the entire approach. Then he put down the chalk and turned to face the class. 50 pairs of eyes stared back at him in disbelief. Professor Allen's face had gone completely still. For several long seconds he said nothing, just examined the board with intense concentration. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, a girl in the front row, Lisa Johnson, the department's rising star who never scored less than perfect on any test, began to clap. Slowly at first, then with more enthusiasm. Others joined in, the applause spreading across the room. Professor Allen raised his hand and the class fell silent again. "Where did you learn to do that, Mr. Washington?" he asked, his voice holding a new tone, something between suspicion and curiosity. "My uncle taught me the basics," Jamal replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "He works at JPL. But mostly I taught myself from books and online lectures." He paused, then added, "Including yours, Professor. Your paper on non-local causality was very helpful." Professor Allen's eyebrows rose slightly. His published papers were typically read by graduate students and fellow researchers, not freshmen in their first month of college. "I see," was all he said. Then, "Return to your seat, Mr. Washington." As Jamal walked back to his desk, he could feel the shift in the room. The curious glances had transformed into looks of respect, confusion, and in some cases, resentment. He had not meant to show off or challenge the professor. He had simply solved the problem as asked. Professor Allen cleared his throat and continued the lecture, but his eyes kept drifting back to Jamal throughout the class. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, he called out over the shuffling of papers and backpacks, "Mr. Washington, a word before you leave." Jamal nodded to the blonde girl who whispered, "Good luck," as she passed by him. He approached the professor's desk with caution. "Sir?" he asked. Professor Allen studied him for a moment. "That was unexpected," he said finally. "How long have you been studying quantum physics?" "Since I was about 12, sir." "And you're how old now?" 19. Professor Allen nodded slowly. "My office hours are on Wednesdays from 3 to 5. I expect to see you there tomorrow. We have more to discuss about your understanding of the material." Jamal couldn't tell if this was a good thing or a bad thing. Was the professor impressed or looking for proof that Jamal had somehow cheated? "Yes, sir," he replied. "I'll be there." As Jamal left the lecture hall, he could feel that something fundamental had changed. He had come to Mason University hoping to learn, to blend in, to quietly make his way through the program. But in one unexpected moment, standing at that chalkboard, he had revealed himself. For better or worse, Professor Allen now knew exactly who he was, and Jamal wasn't sure either of them was ready for what would come next. Jamal stood outside Professor Allen's office at exactly 3 o'clock on Wednesday. His hand hovered near the door, hesitating before he knocked. The polished wooden door had a small nameplate that read, "Dr. Richard Allen, Chair of Theoretical Physics." Through the frosted glass, Jamal could see a shadow moving inside. He took a deep breath and knocked 3 times. "Enter," came the professor's crisp voice. Jamal pushed the door open to find Professor Allen sitting behind a large desk covered with stacks of papers, open books, and a laptop. The office walls were lined with bookshelves filled with physics, texts, and framed awards. A window behind the desk looked out onto the campus quad where students walked between classes. "Mr. Washington," Professor Allen said, looking up from his computer. "Close the door and take a seat." Jamal did as instructed, settling into a chair across from the professor. The leather creaked under his weight. "I've been reviewing your application file," Professor Allen said, tapping a folder on his desk. "Your test scores were impressive, but your high school didn't offer advanced physics courses. You attended Lincoln High in Detroit, correct?" "Yes, sir. Not exactly known for producing theoretical physicists." There was something in his tone that made Jamal sit up straighter. "They have good teachers who care," Jamal replied carefully. Professor Allen studied him for a moment, his fingers forming a steeple under his chin. "What you did in class yesterday was unusual. In 30 years of teaching, I've never seen a first-year student handle that level of complexity with such ease." Jamal wasn't sure if he was being accused of something or praised. "Thank you, sir." "It wasn't a compliment, Mr. Washington. It was an observation." Professor Allen leaned forward. "I want to understand how you did it. I just solved the equation the way you taught in your paper on Bell's inequality. The extended proof was similar to the approach in Dr. Kim's work on quantum coherence." Professor Allen's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've read Sung-Hee Kim's work?" "Yes, sir. My uncle helped me understand the more difficult parts when I was in high school. This uncle at JPL, what's his name? Paul Washington. He's a systems engineer for the Europa mission." Professor Allen typed something into his computer, his eyes scanning the screen. After a moment, he nodded slightly. "I see. And did your uncle teach you how to solve yesterday's problem specifically?" Jamal felt a flash of anger but kept his voice steady. "No, sir. I've never seen that exact problem before, but the principles are the same across similar quantum entanglement scenarios." Professor Allen watched him closely, as if waiting for him to reveal something. When Jamal didn't continue, the professor opened a drawer and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. "I'd like you to solve another problem," he said, writing rapidly on the paper, without any help or references. Jamal took the paper when Professor Allen handed it to him. This equation was even more complex than the one in class. It dealt with quantum tunneling across multiple potential barriers, a topic they hadn't covered yet. "May I use the whiteboard?" Jamal asked, pointing to the large board mounted on the wall. Professor Allen nodded, his expression unreadable. Jamal walked to the board and picked up a marker. The problem was challenging, but not impossible. He began working through it step by step, aware of Professor Allen's eyes on his back. The only sound in the room was the squeak of the marker against the whiteboard and the ticking of a clock on the wall. After about 15 minutes, Jamal stepped back from the board. "I think that's the solution, though there might be a more elegant approach I'm missing." Professor Allen rose from his desk and came to stand beside Jamal, examining his work. His eyes moved methodically from one end of the board to the other, checking each step. "You made a small error here," he said, pointing to a section of the equation. "But your recovery was creative. I wouldn't have approached it that way." "Is it wrong?" Jamal asked. "No," Professor Allen said slowly. "It's just different, unorthodox." He turned to look directly at Jamal. "Who taught you to think this way?" "No one, sir. I just tried different approaches until I find one that works." Professor Allen returned to his desk and sat down heavily in his chair. He seemed to be wrestling with something internally. "Mr. Washington, I'm going to be direct with you. Your presence in my introductory class is a waste of your time and mine. You already understand the material at a level beyond what I teach in that course." Jamal felt his stomach drop. Was he being kicked out of the class? "I'm going to move you to my advanced seminar," Professor Allen continued. "It's normally reserved for graduate students, but I believe you'll find it more appropriate for your skill level." Relief washed over Jamal, quickly followed by concern. Will that affect my required credits for my degree plan? I'll handle the administrative details. You'll receive the same credits, just for a more advanced course. Jamal nodded, trying to process this unexpected development. Thank you, sir. Professor Allen was quiet for a moment, studying Jamal with an intensity that was uncomfortable. I have to ask, Mr. Washington, why didn't you apply to MIT or Caltech? With your abilities, you could have gone anywhere. The question caught Jamal off guard. He hadn't expected such a personal inquiry from the stern professor. My mom got sick during my senior year, he said finally. Cancer. I needed to stay close to home in case. He didn't finish the sentence. Mason gave me a full scholarship, and it's only a 3-hour drive from Detroit. Something in Professor Allen's expression shifted, a slight softening around the eyes. I see. He cleared his throat. How is your mother now? In remission, thankfully. Professor Allen nodded. The advanced seminar meets Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 in room 302. There are only 8 other students, all graduate level. The reading list is substantial. He handed Jamal a syllabus from his desk. I expect full participation and preparation for each session. Yes, sir, I'll be prepared. See that you are. That will be all for today, Mr. Washington. Jamal gathered his backpack and headed for the door, but Professor Allen's voice stopped him. One more thing. Jamal turned back. Sir? The department has a research assistant position open. It includes a stipend that would supplement your scholarship. Given your unusual aptitude, I think you would be suitable. If you're interested, the application is due Friday. Jamal tried to hide his surprise. Research positions were rarely offered to first-year students. Thank you, Professor. I'll apply. As Jamal left the office and walked across campus, his mind raced. In just 2 days, everything had changed. The research position would look amazing on graduate school applications, and the advanced seminar would challenge him in ways his current classes didn't. But as he approached his dorm building, doubt crept in. The other students in the seminar would be older, more experienced. Would they accept him or would they see him as an intruder? And Professor Allen, his sudden change from suspicion to support, felt strange, almost calculated. Jamal's roommate, Eric, was playing video games when Jamal entered their small dorm room. How'd it go with the scary professor? Eric asked, not looking away from his game. He moved me to his advanced graduate seminar, Jamal replied, dropping onto his bed. Eric paused his game and turned to stare at Jamal. Are you serious? That's the class everyone calls the slaughterhouse because of how many students drop out. He also suggested I apply for a department research position. Eric whistled. Man, you went from being put on the spot to being the golden boy in 2 days. That's wild. Jamal stared at the ceiling. Yeah, it is. So this is good news, right? Why do you look worried? Jamal couldn't explain the uneasy feeling in his stomach. Professor Allen's sudden interest felt too abrupt, too convenient. I just don't want to be anyone's token success story, he said finally. Eric nodded slowly. I get that. But hey, maybe take the win for now. This could be huge for you. Yeah, Jamal agreed, trying to sound more confident than he felt. It could be. As he lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, Jamal wondered what Professor Allen's real motivations were. Was this genuine recognition of his abilities or was something else at play? The advanced seminar would start tomorrow, and Jamal had a feeling it would reveal the truth, both about Professor Allen's intentions and about whether Jamal truly belonged at Mason University. Either way, there was no turning back now. Room 302 was smaller than the large lecture hall where Jamal had first encountered Professor Allen. Instead of rows of seats facing a blackboard, there was a round table with 10 chairs. When Jamal entered the room at 10 minutes before 4, 3 students were already seated, engaged in quiet conversation. They looked up as he entered, their expressions curious. Are you lost? Asked a woman with short red hair and glasses. She looked to be in her late 20s. No, Jamal replied, setting his backpack on an empty chair. I'm Jamal Washington. Professor, Allen moved me to this seminar. The 3 students exchanged glances. You're an undergrad? asked a man with a beard and an MIT sweatshirt. First year, Jamal confirmed. The room fell silent. Jamal felt their stares but focused on taking out his notebook and the stack of research papers Professor Allen had assigned. He had stayed up until 2 a.m. reading them, taking careful notes on quantum field theories that were well beyond the scope of his original class. Gradually, the other students arrived. Each reacted with similar surprise at seeing Jamal, but no one else questioned him directly. At exactly 4 o'clock, Professor Allen strode into the room carrying a stack of papers. "I see you've all met Mr. Washington," he said, setting his materials on the table. "He'll be joining us for the remainder of the semester." A tall, thin student with blonde hair raised his hand. "Professor, is this the same student who solved the Bell inequality extension in your intro class?" "Word travels fast," Professor Allen said dryly. "Yes, Mr. Peters, the same. Now let's begin. Today we're discussing Garrick's paper on quantum decoherence in multiparticle systems." For the next 2 hours, the seminar engaged in intense discussion about the research paper. The graduate students were clearly brilliant, challenging each other and Professor Allen with insightful questions. Jamal remained quiet, listening carefully and taking notes. "Mr. Washington," Professor Allen said suddenly, "you've been silent. What are your thoughts on Garrick's proposed experiment to measure quantum coherence across entangled particles separated by extreme distances?" All eyes turned to Jamal. He felt his heart beating faster but kept his voice steady. "I think his methodology is sound, but his estimation of decoherence time doesn't account for gravitational effects properly," Jamal said. "If you look at page 47, his calculations assume a flat spacetime approximation, which might be fine for laboratory distances but becomes problematic at the astronomical scales he proposes." The room was silent for a moment. Then the red-haired woman, whose name was Dr. Susan Miller, nodded slowly. "I had the same concern," she said, flipping through her copy of the paper. "The gravitational correction would significantly alter the predicted results." "Precisely," Professor Allen said, looking satisfied. "And how would you correct for this, Mr. Washington?" Jamal explained his approach, drawing a quick diagram in his notebook and sliding it to the center of the table. 2 of the graduate students leaned forward with interest. "That's actually quite elegant," said the man in the MIT sweatshirt, who Jamal now knew was Ben Taylor, a third-year doctoral candidate. By the end of the seminar, the initial tension had eased somewhat. As they packed up their materials, Susan approached. "Jamal, where did you study before this?" she asked. "Lincoln High School in Detroit," Jamal replied. She looked surprised. "No, I meant which university." "This is my first year in college." Susan stared at him for a moment, then smiled slightly. "Well, that's unexpected. A few of us grab coffee after seminar on Thursdays. You're welcome to join." Jamal hesitated, then nodded. "Thanks, I'd like that." As they walked to the campus coffee shop, Jamal learned more about his fellow students. Susan was researching quantum computing applications. Ben was focused on particle physics. The blonde student, Ryan Peters, was studying theoretical cosmology. They were all at least 5 years older than Jamal, with undergraduate degrees from prestigious universities. At the coffee shop, they claimed a corner table. Ryan returned from the counter with his drink and sat directly across from Jamal. "So how exactly did you end up in Allen's advanced seminar?" he asked. "He's never taken an undergrad before, let alone a freshman." Jamal explained what had happened in the introductory class and the subsequent meeting in Professor Allen's office. "That doesn't sound like Allen at all," Ben said, frowning. "He's not exactly known for giving people chances." "Maybe he saw something special," Susan suggested, giving Jamal a thoughtful look. Ryan leaned forward. "Or maybe he has other reasons. The department's been under pressure from the university to improve diversity metrics. Last year's report showed physics lagging behind other departments." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Jamal felt his face grow warm. "You think he moved me to the seminar because I'm black?" he asked, his voice even. Ryan shrugged. "I'm just saying the timing is interesting. The department needs a success story." "Ryan, stop," Susan said sharply. "That's not fair." "I'm not questioning his abilities," Ryan replied. "I'm questioning Allen's motives. There's a difference. Jamal stood up. I should go. I have an application to finish for the research assistant position. He offered you the RA spot too? Ben asked, surprised. That was supposed to go to a doctoral student. Jamal grabbed his backpack. He suggested I apply. Nothing's decided yet. Susan touched his arm lightly. Don't mind Ryan. He applied for that position too. As Jamal walked back to his dorm, Ryan's words echoed in his mind. Was that why Professor Allen had singled him out? Not because of his abilities, but because of what he represented for the department? When he reached his room, Jamal found Eric playing video games with two friends. Hey, physics genius, Eric called out. How was the fancy graduate class? Fine, Jamal mumbled, not in the mood to talk about it. Eric must have sensed something was wrong because he paused his game. Everything okay? Yeah. Jamal sat at his desk and opened his laptop. Just need to finish this application. Later that night, after Eric's friends had left, Jamal was still staring at the application form on his screen. The final question asked why he believed he was qualified for the position. What's holding you up? Eric asked, noticing Jamal's frustration. I don't know if I should submit this, Jamal admitted. What if I only got the opportunity because they need a diversity success story? Eric sat on the edge of his bed. Man, does it matter? You clearly have the skills. Who cares why the door opened if you belong in the room? It matters to me, Jamal said quietly. Look, Eric said. My dad always says that when you're black, people will always question how you got your spot, whether it's school or a job or whatever. You can't control what they think. All you can control is what you do once you're there. Jamal considered this. Your dad sounds smart. College football coach for 20 years. He knows about proving yourself. Jamal turned back to his computer and began typing his answer to the final question. Whatever Professor Allen's reasons, for giving him these opportunities, Jamal would prove he deserved them. The next morning, Jamal dropped off his application at the department office. As he turned to leave, he nearly collided with Professor Allen. Mr. Washington, the professor said. Just the person I was hoping to see. Do you have a moment? Yes, sir, Jamal replied, wondering what the professor wanted now. I've been discussing your situation with some colleagues, Professor Allen said as they walked down the hallway. We'd like to offer you something special, a chance to join our summer research program at CERN in Switzerland. Jamal stopped walking. CERN? But that program is for advanced doctoral students, yes, Professor Allen finished. But exceptions can be made for exceptional talent. Jamal studied the professor's face, looking for any sign of ulterior motives. Why are you doing this? Professor Allen's expression hardened slightly. Because physics doesn't care about age or background, Mr. Washington. It only cares about insight and ability. You have both. As Professor Allen walked away, Jamal stood in the hallway, torn between excitement and suspicion. The opportunity was incredible, but was it being offered for the right reasons? And did that really matter if it could change the course of his future? 2 weeks passed quickly. Jamal fell into a new routine, attending his regular classes, participating in the advanced seminar, and now working 10 hours a week as a research assistant in Professor Allen's lab. The research position had been awarded to him just 3 days after he submitted his application. Ryan Peters had given him cold looks ever since. Jamal sat at a computer in the physics lab, reviewing data from quantum entanglement experiments. The numbers on the screen blurred as fatigue set in. He had been working since 8 that morning, and it was now past 6 in the evening. Still here? Came Susan's voice from behind him. Jamal turned to see her carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him. Thanks, he said gratefully, taking a sip. I'm trying to find patterns in these anomalies from last week's experiment. Susan pulled up a chair beside him. Any luck? Maybe. Jamal pointed to a section of data. There's something strange happening at these intervals. It's almost like there's interference, but I can't figure out the source. Susan leaned closer to see the screen. That is odd. Have you talked to Professor Allen about it? Not yet. I wanted to have something concrete to show him first. Susan nodded. Smart. He respects preparation. She was quiet for a moment. You know, you've impressed a lot of people around here. Even Ryan is starting to come around, though he'd never admit it. Jamal smiled faintly. Good to know. The CERN opportunity, Susan said carefully. Have you decided if you're going to accept? I'm still thinking about it. In truth, Jamal had thought of little else for 2 weeks. The chance to work at CERN, even for a summer, was a dream opportunity. But Ryan's words about being a diversity pick still bothered him. Well, don't think too long. Alan needs an answer by Friday. Susan stood up. Don't stay too late. There's a department mixer tomorrow and you should be fresh for it. After Susan left, Jamal continued working for another hour before saving his findings and heading back to his dorm. The campus was quiet, with most students already at dinner or studying in the library. As he passed the administration building, he noticed the light still on in one office, Dean Howard's. Jamal had met the Dean of Sciences only once, at an orientation event. He was about to continue walking when he heard Professor Allen's voice coming from the open window. Martin, this is exactly the kind of student we've been looking for, Professor Allen was saying. His work is exceptional. I don't disagree. Richard, another voice, presumably Dean Howard, replied. But fast-tracking him this way raises questions. The Faculty Senate is already asking why a freshman is taking a graduate seminar and working as your RA. Because he's brilliant. His solution to the Meyer-Klein problem was more elegant than anything I've seen from our doctoral candidates. And the CERN recommendation? That's unprecedented. There was a pause before Professor Allen spoke again. Think of what this could mean for the department, Martin. A young black student from an inner-city high school becoming one of our greatest success stories. Jamal felt his stomach tighten. The optics are certainly appealing, Dean Howard admitted. The president has been pushing all departments to improve diversity metrics. This isn't about metrics, Professor Allen said, his voice sharp. This is about recognizing talent wherever we find it. The fact that he helps our diversity numbers is secondary. Is it? The dean asked. Would you be pushing this hard if he were just another white student from a prep school? There was a long silence. Jamal stood frozen, waiting for Professor Allen's answer. I'd like to think so, Professor Allen said finally. But I can't be certain. None of us can. We all have biases we don't recognize. Jamal had heard enough. He walked away quickly, his mind racing. So Ryan had been right, at least partially. His race was a factor in these opportunities. But how much of a factor? Was it the main reason? Or just a bonus from Professor Allen's perspective? When he reached his dorm room, Eric was studying at his desk. You look like you've seen a ghost, Eric said, turning in his chair. Jamal dropped his backpack and sat heavily on his bed. I just overheard Professor Allen talking to Dean Howard about me. And they were discussing how I'd make a great diversity success story for the department. Eric winced. Ouch. But they still said your work was good, right? Professor Allen did. But he also admitted he wasn't sure if he'd be pushing as hard for me if I were white. Eric was quiet for a moment. That's actually kind of refreshing. Most people wouldn't admit that. How is that refreshing? Jamal asked, frustrated. It means I'm not being judged solely on my abilities. Welcome to being black in academia, Eric said with a humorless laugh. Look, the question isn't whether race is a factor, it always is one way or another. The question is whether you're actually qualified. And from what I've seen, you definitely are. Jamal lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The department mixer is tomorrow night. All the faculty and graduate students will be there. Are you going? I have to. Professor Allen specifically mentioned it to me yesterday. The next evening, Jamal stood in a corner of the physics department lounge, holding a glass of soda and watching the room. Professors chatted with graduate students while soft classical music played in the background. He felt out of place in his one good button-up shirt while others wore blazers and ties. There you are, Susan said, appearing beside him. I was wondering if you'd show up. Professor Allen made it clear attendance was expected, Jamal replied. Susan smiled. He does that. Come on, There's someone you should meet. She led him across the room to where an older man with silver hair was talking to Professor Allen and several other faculty members. Dr. Lawrence, Susan said. This is Jamal Washington, the student I mentioned. The man turned, his eyes bright with interest. Ah, yes. Professor Allen has told me about your work on quantum entanglement variations. Jamal shook his hand. It's an honor to meet you, sir. Dr. Lawrence is visiting from Princeton, Susan explained. He's one of the leading researchers in quantum field theory. And a member of the CERN Summer Selection Committee, Dr. Lawrence added with a smile. I understand you're being considered for our program. Jamal glanced at Professor Allen, who was watching the interaction closely. Yes, sir, it's an amazing opportunity. Indeed. Perhaps you could tell me about your current research? For the next 20 minutes, Jamal explained his work, answering Dr. Lawrence's increasingly complex questions. He was aware of a small crowd gathering around them, including Ryan and several other graduate students. Impressive, Dr. Lawrence said when Jamal finished. Most doctoral students couldn't explain those concepts with such clarity. He turned to Professor Allen. You were right about him, Richard. As the evening continued, more professors approached Jamal, asking about his background and his work. The attention was both flattering and uncomfortable. Was their interest in him genuine, or was he just a curiosity, the black freshman in a graduate world? Near the end of the mixer, Jamal found himself alone with Professor Allen by the refreshment table. You made quite an impression on Dr. Lawrence, Professor Allen said. He rarely shows that much interest in students. He seemed very knowledgeable, Jamal replied cautiously. Professor Allen studied him. You've been distant this week, Mr. Washington. Is something wrong? Jamal hesitated, then decided to be direct. I overheard your conversation with Dean Howard yesterday. Professor Allen's expression didn't change. I see. I need to know, am I just a diversity success story to you? No, Professor Allen said firmly. You're a brilliant young physicist who happens to be black. In a perfect world, only the first part of that sentence would matter. But we don't live in a perfect world. So my race is a factor in these opportunities? In this department, in this university, in this field, yes, it's a factor. It opens certain doors that might otherwise remain closed even to someone of your talent. That's the reality. Professor Allen looked directly at Jamal. The question is, once those doors are open, what will you do? Will you let concerns about why the door opened stop you from walking through it? The question echoed what Eric had said. Jamal was quiet for a long moment. The CERN program, he said finally. If I go, will I belong there? Really belong? That, Professor Allen said, is entirely up to you. As Jamal left the mixer, his mind was still unsettled. But one thing had become clear. These opportunities, whatever the reasons behind them, were real, and he had a choice to make. 3 months had passed since Jamal first stood at Professor Allen's chalkboard. Spring had arrived on campus, bringing with it a sense of renewal. Trees that had been bare all winter now burst with green leaves, and students studied on the grass, between classes. Jamal sat on a bench outside the physics building, reviewing his notes for the day's seminar. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Just got your letter. So proud of you, baby. CERN. My son is going to Switzerland. He smiled at the message. After weeks of uncertainty, he had finally accepted the CERN opportunity. The official letter had arrived yesterday confirming his place in the summer program. Only 5 students from across the country had been selected. There you are, Susan said, dropping onto the bench beside him. Ready for the big presentation? Jamal closed his notebook. As ready as I'll ever be. Today was significant. For the final seminar session, Professor Allen had asked each student to present original research. Jamal's presentation would be on the anomalies he had discovered in the quantum entanglement experiments, anomalies that had led him to develop a new theory about particle behavior under specific conditions. Nervous? Susan asked. A little, Jamal admitted. The whole department will be there. News of Jamal's acceptance to the CERN program had spread quickly. Professor Allen had announced it in a department email, highlighting Jamal as the youngest student ever selected from Mason University. This had drawn attention from faculty across the science departments, many of whom would attend today's presentation. "You'll do great," Susan assured him. "Your research is solid." As they walked to the seminar room, Jamal thought about how much had changed. The graduate students who had once looked at him with suspicion now treated him as one of their own. Even Ryan had warmed up, especially after Jamal helped him solve a problem in his dissertation research. The seminar room was packed when they arrived. Extra chairs had been brought in, and people stood along the walls. Professor Allen nodded to Jamal from the front row. "Quite the crowd," Susan whispered. After 2 other presentations, it was Jamal's turn. He connected his laptop to the projector and faced the room. "Good afternoon," he began. "My research focuses on anomalous patterns in quantum entanglement measurements that suggest a previously unobserved interaction between entangled particles." As he spoke, his initial nervousness faded. This was his work, his discovery. He explained the data, the patterns he had identified, and his theory about what they meant. The room was silent except for his voice and the occasional sound of someone taking notes. When he finished his presentation, there was a moment of quiet before Professor Allen stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Washington," he said. "Before we open for questions, I'd like to say that in 30 years of teaching, I've rarely seen such innovative thinking from a graduate student, let alone a first-year undergraduate." He turned to the audience. "Questions?" Hands went up around the room. Jamal fielded questions from professors and graduate students, some supportive, others challenging his methodology or conclusions. He answered each one carefully, acknowledging limitations in his research while defending his core findings. Dr. Carter from the mathematics department raised his hand. "Have you considered the implications of your theory for quantum computing? If these anomalies behave as you suggest, they could potentially solve the decoherence problem in quantum bit stability." Jamal nodded. "That's actually the next phase of my research. I believe these findings could lead to more stable qubit designs, though there are significant engineering challenges to overcome." The questions continued for nearly 40 minutes. By the end, Jamal felt drained but exhilarated. As people began to leave, many stopped to congratulate him or ask follow-up questions. Professor Allen approached last after the room had mostly emptied. "Exceptional work," he said. "Dr. Lawrence called me this morning. He's already arranged for you to continue this research at CERN this summer." "Thank you, sir," Jamal replied. "For everything." Professor Allen studied him for a moment. "You've come a long way since that first day in my classroom. I owe you an apology for how I treated you then." "You were testing me," Jamal said. "I understand that now." "No," Professor Allen shook his head. "I was making assumptions based on appearances. I saw a young black student from a public high school and assumed you wouldn't be able to handle the material." He paused. "I was wrong, and I'm not too proud to admit it." Jamal was surprised by the professor's candor. "I've made assumptions, too," he admitted, "about your reasons for helping me." "Fair enough," Professor Allen said with a slight smile. "We've both learned something, it seems." As they walked out of the building together, Professor Allen asked, "Have you thought about what comes after CERN? Your regular classes must seem rather basic now." "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about that," Jamal said. "I'm interested in the Accelerated Master's program." The Accelerated program would allow him to complete his bachelor's and master's degrees in a total of 4 years instead of 6. It was highly competitive and rarely open to students before their junior year. "I'll support your application," Professor Allen said without hesitation, "though I suspect you'll be ready for doctoral work even sooner." They stopped at the edge of the quad. Students hurried past them, rushing to classes or the library. "There's something else I've been thinking about," Jamal said. "When I return from CERN, I'd like to start a mentoring program for high school students interested in physics, especially students from schools like mine, where advanced science courses aren't always available." Professor Allen looked thoughtful. "The department could support that. We could offer lab tours, maybe even summer workshops. That would be amazing, Jamal said, thinking of the students at his old high school who never got the chance to see what was possible in science. Consider it done, Professor Allen said. Send me a proposal when you have time. As Professor Allen walked away, Jamal's phone buzzed with another text. It was from Eric. Heard your presentation killed. Celebration dinner tonight? Jamal smiled and texted back, Definitely. I have news about a mentoring program idea. He looked across the campus, taking in the scene, students walking to class, professors engaged in discussion, the red brick buildings. That had become his home. 6 months ago, he had sat in the back row of a classroom, trying not to be noticed. Now he was preparing for CERN, planning a mentoring program, and thinking about graduate school. The path hadn't been straight or simple. There had been moments of doubt, questions about belonging, and uncomfortable truths about how race and opportunity intersected in his field. Those complexities hadn't disappeared, but Jamal had found his place despite them, or perhaps because he had faced them directly. As he walked toward his next class, Jamal thought about the young students he hoped to mentor someday. He wanted them to know that they belonged in science, that their minds mattered, that doors might open for many reasons, but what you did once inside was what truly counted. His phone buzzed once more. His mother again. Called your uncle. He's crying, he's so proud. We both are. You're changing everything, Jamal. Everything. Jamal smiled as he read the message. She was right. Things were changing. Not just for him, but perhaps, in some small way, for those who would follow. The young black student who had been commanded to solve a physics problem had found not just an answer, but a purpose. And that, Jamal thought, was the most elegant solution of all.